Snow likely on the higher routes here, also across parts of northern England. Some of the higher routes not very pleasant for a time through the course of tomorrow afternoon. We'll turn back to rain as we go through the day. Mostly rain at low levels and across the southwest, where it will actually eventually get to double figures. But East Anglia in the southeast staying cold but largely dry until the rain pushes in here late afternoon into the evening. It's going to be followed by showers, and those showers turning wintry once more. So we do have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and ice from Thursday evening into Friday morning across northwest England, parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland. The snow could really start to build up here, and as temperatures won't be as low but still getting close to freezing, could lead to some icy conditions, particularly for Friday morning's commute as the showers continue to come in. Mostly rain at low levels and on the coast, but certainly over any kind of smallish hills we will see some snow building up during Friday morning in those showers. Scattering of showers elsewhere, but for many central and eastern parts, Friday dry and bright with sunny spells, but it will be cold. Temperatures again below average and feeling colder with the wind.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, as the recently boosted leader of No Opposition, Keir Starmer, faces a 6th stint in isolation after catching COVID again, isn't it now obvious that constantly boosting the healthy is no longer a sustainable path out of this pandemic? I'll explain why we need to stop our booster tunnel vision in the digest before my superstar panel weigh in tonight. The columnist and broadcaster Emily Carver, publican and social media sensation Adam Brooks, and the political and royal commentator Daisy McAndrew. As an MP makes this heartbreaking plea to Boris Johnson in Parliament.
Does he agree with me that the human rights of disabled people, sick people, and the elderly are not fair weather luxuries, and that everyone with dementia, wherever they live, has the right to family life?
Loose Women star and mental health advocate Denise Welsh is here in the studio at 10:20 to explain why she's campaigning against cruel and inhumane COVID restrictions. As tennis star Novak Djokovic's vaccine exemption route threatens his place in the Australian Open, should athletes be able to compete around the world regardless of whether they've been jabbed? Former England footballer Matt Le Tissier and microbiologist Sally Jane Cutler debate that in the clash, and I want your verdict on this too. Loads going on with Djokovic today at GB News on Twitter. Should chilling tales about life and lockdown in China be a wake-up call about the dangers of public health fanaticism? Spiked Online's chief political writer Brendan O'Neill rails against the dystopian hell of zero COVID in The Outsider at 9:50. As the Omicron scariant fails to deliver the destruction shamefully predicted by Sage, should there be more scrutiny of the vested interests of scientists? Brilliant columnist Rod Liddell gives his uncompromising take in Uncancelled. The Duke and Duchess of Woke, remember them, told us they would change the world. But as it's revealed, their lawyers received more cash than their charity last year. Will the public wise up to Harry and Meghan's fake philanthropy? Legendary royal biographer Robert Jobson tackles that in Crown Jewels at 9:40. Is an Essex school wrong to axe the courageous J.K. Rowling as the name of a house and replace her with Dame Callie Holmes? And should the so-called Colston Four, who toppled a Bristol statue into the river, have been thrown in the clink? We'll debate these topics and more of the day's big stories in the media buzz. Plus, we'll bring you a first look at tomorrow's newspapers and crown another Greatest Britain and Union jackass. I'm Dan Wootton. Let's go. Just one thing first, though. Lots of examples today of our so-called leaders failing to understand what it's going to take to learn to live with COVID. I'll tackle the leader of no opposition, Keir Starmer, in my digest shortly. But first to scheming Sturgeon in Scotland, who has admitted that her ludicrous measures won't stop the transmission of the Omicron variant, but vowed to continue with them anyway.
While abiding by current guidance and protections is at this stage vitally important, we do know that measures which restrict our lives are not sustainable indefinitely. And with a variant as infectious as Omicron, the kinds of protections that are still possible within our financial resources and without causing greater harm in other ways, while still very important at this stage, won't control transmission to the same extent as these measures would have done with other less transmissible variants.
Still very important, but won't control the transmission. But let's ruin the economy, anyone. Good one, Sturgeon. She also owes the Scottish Daily Mail an apology, because today Sturgeon cut the self-isolation period from 10 to 7 days. But when the newspaper's Scottish political editor suggested she do just that last month, she rudely slapped him down.
Would you cut the requirement for self-isolation?
Yeah, that would really help, because that would spread infection even further, and that would be not doing any favours to businesses. I don't know if you've listened to a single word I said.
It's time for Scots to wake up and demand Sturgeon butt out of their lives. Here's tonight's superstar panel, by the way. Happy New Year to the columnist and broadcaster Emily Carver, the publican and social media sensation Adam Brooks, and the political and royal commentator Daisy McAndrew. They'll take me on in just one moment. But first, the news at 9 with Polly Middlehurst.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your news headlines. COVID measures have been updated right across Britain. Pre-departure PCR tests for travellers returning to England and Wales from abroad will be scrapped. And from next week, people who test positive with a lateral flow test who are asymptomatic won't need to take a PCR test to begin their isolation. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, also confirmed she'll shorten the COVID isolation period from 10 to 7 days from tonight. Well, Boris Johnson defended the government's financial support for vulnerable people during the pandemic at his first PMQs of the year earlier on today. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, stood in for Sir Keir Starmer following his positive COVID test, and she warned millions of British workers are facing a further pay cut and a tax hike, with inflation at its highest level since the early 1990s.
His government has failed to invest in long-term energy security. His government decided to let gas storages collapse. His government let the energy market run out of control. 27 energy companies have gone bust in the last year, and now household bills are going through the roof.
Angela Rayner. Well, Boris Johnson retaliated to that, saying record numbers of people are now in work, and he backed his party's warm homes discount, winter fuel and cold weather payments.
2.2 million people supported with the Warm Homes discount, Mr Speaker, worth £140 per week, which we introduced. Pensioners supported with the £300 winter fuel payments, Mr Speaker. Cold weather payments worth £25 a week for 4 million people up and down the country, Mr Speaker.
Boris Johnson. Well, to the United States now, where at least 13 people, including 7 children, have all died in a house fire in Philadelphia after smoke alarms failed. Police say there were 4 smoke detectors in the building, but none of them went off. The city's fire department confirmed 8 people had managed to escape and a child and an adult were taken to hospital. In Munich, several hundred people have taken to the streets in protest against COVID measures there. During a so-called Corona walk, a crowd of demonstrators, mostly not wearing masks, chanted freedom as they marched near the central square in the German city. This comes as the number of daily infections in the country started to rise a week ago, despite new measures being put in place, including showing proof of vaccination for many indoor activities. And here, 4 people have been cleared of criminal damage after pulling down the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. The memorial of the slave trader was toppled and thrown into the harbour during the Black Lives Matter protest in June last year. All 4 defendants admitted being involved but denied their actions were criminal. And a warning, the following clip does have flashing imagery. You're right up to date. Now back to Dan.
Could there be a better example of our failed coronavirus policies than Sir Keir Starmer, who is in isolation again after contracting COVID-19? The leader of no opposition has already spent numerous stints in isolation following the ludicrous rules that he's supported that are continuing to unnecessarily damage our economy. And despite being boosted just 1 month ago, Starmer has been locked up another time for at least 7 days. Do you know, this is the 6th time he's been in isolation, meaning he's actually been out of action for 57 days. Now, his salary is paid by us as taxpayers, so he probably doesn't care. He's got his lovely London mansion with lots of technology to communicate with his staff, and delivery drivers aplenty to service his every need. But if Starmer was struggling to put food on the table or trying to run a small business, then yet another week out of the world would be infuriating and potentially catastrophic. Before he found himself in lockdown again, Starmer proved he doesn't understand the lessons from Omicron, that vaccinating the young and the healthy is no silver bullet. He's an example, isn't he, that it doesn't stop transmission. Have a listen to his answer about keeping schools open. Starmer wants to vaccinate more healthy children.
Only about half of those over 12 who are eligible to be vaccinated have been vaccinated. We said to the government, use the Christmas period to vaccinate those children. We need much better ventilation. We've been saying this for about a year to stop the virus spreading in schools.
Starmer hasn't worked it out yet, has he? He's got COVID just 4 weeks after being boosted. It's now obvious that constant boosters for the healthy is no longer a sustainable path out of this pandemic. While you might not hear this being discussed on the BBC or Sky News or ITV News or by our gutless political leaders, this is actually not an extremist or niche view. In fact, it's a position this week bravely shared by Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, perhaps the most pro-vaccine human being in the land. After all, he's the chairman of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation and one of the driving forces behind the development of the Oxford AstraZeneca jab. And in a bombshell interview this week with the Daily Telegraph, he made comments that suggest Israel's plan to vaccinate the population with a 4th jab is likely wrong. His words are worth noting. Professor Pollard said, The future must be focusing on the vulnerable and making boosters or treatments available to them to protect them. We know that people have strong antibodies for a few months after their third vaccination, but more data are needed to assess whether, when and how often those who are vulnerable will need additional doses. Here's the key line. We can't vaccinate the planet every 4 to 6 months. It's not sustainable or affordable. In the future, we need to target the vulnerable. Now, Professor Pollard could not be clearer. The days of the government cajoling, or if you're President Macron in France, quite simply bullying healthy folk into being jabbed multiple times, must end. This conversation is going to be difficult for politicians who have put so much faith and political capital into the jabs. But when you've got the UK's Mr. Vaccination himself saying we've got to stop this sort of one-eyed focus on boosting everyone every few weeks, we must take note. To respond now, my superstar panel, the columnist and broadcaster Emily Carver, the publican and social media sensation Adam Brooks, and the political and royal commentator Daisy McAndrew. Daisy, he's right, isn't he? This is going to be a difficult conversation, but Professor Pollard isn't coming from this from any political angle. He's simply stating facts. It's not practical to keep boosting healthy people every 10 weeks.
It's not practical, and I think just as importantly, it's not affordable. And then when you look at the wider picture, the more vaccines we're hoarding and using for ourselves, the fewer vaccines there are for the rest of the world, where some populations, some countries, only 10% are vaccinated, and so they're vulnerable, are much, much more likely to die, and are going to see swathes of people dying in other developing countries. So there are lots of reasons against this. But I think the important thing is the conversation, because what I really hate at the moment, and this is, you and I have discussed it many, many times, is the way the conversation has gone. If you stick your head above the parapet and say, I'm not quite sure about this, you're instantly demonised as an anti-vaxxer, as a nutter, as a swivel-eyed loon. And that's really unhealthy, because then the actual nutters and swivel-eyed loons sort of occupy the space where actually proper questions and sensible queries and what-ifs should be occupying. So that's one of the things I hate. And it does go a bit on both sides, but particularly this issue, and I am hearing sort of centrists now talk about a sensible conversation, which is giving me some faith.
Well, let me cover. That's why I wanted to share the words of Professor Sir Andrew Pollard so significantly. But it's really shocked me that the BBC haven't been leading on his words, ITV haven't been leading on his words. This bloke is Mr. Vaccination. We need to listen to him. Instead, the media does seem to keep talking about the need for fourth jabs. And actually, just because Israel's doing it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it sensible.
Well, it's just another thing that shows how weak Sir Keir Starmer is. His focus, lazy focus on getting children jabbed is really not where he should be putting using his political capital.
When we know it doesn't stop transmission.
When we know it doesn't stop transmission, we have this awful policy of mask mandates, which is nothing but political theatre. We know that evidence is out today that the government has published itself that shows that it's totally not necessary, and there's no evidence to suggest that it will even help transmission or save lives for that matter. But I do think it's just a common sense approach from this doctor. Booster the vulnerable who need it. We can't go around boostering, as he said, every healthy young person every 10 weeks. It's one of the reasons I haven't yet got my booster. It's not because I'm against getting it. I just don't think it should be a priority for me to have a booster against what is, thankfully, likely to be just a bad cold for myself. So,
Adam Brooks, where do you stand on this?
I think he's going to anger a lot of the vaccine groupies, even though he's such a qualified person to speak.
And he's the ultimate vaccine groupie, isn't he?
So they can't call him an anti-vaxxer. I mean, we had this with the JCVI, with a children's decision. Some people are so wrapped up in this vaccine sort of mentality that they can't see that there are actually experts that know what they're talking about and do not agree with this, I call it hit and hope approach. You know, I think we should be talking about antibody testing. Maybe the vulnerable and over 60s should be antibody tested every 6 months or so. But this, you know, blanket vaccination every sort of 3 to 6 months, I think it's quite scary.
Well, Daisy, isn't it farcical, the Keir Starmer situation? And I actually think if the story of one man over the past few months proves that actually the rules just don't make sense, it's him, because a lot of people simply could not afford to be out of work for 57 days, out of action, unable to leave the house. And here he is saying, vaccinate kids to stop transmission, when he had COVID literally in October. He then was boosted in December, and he's got COVID again. When's the guy going to work it out?
Yes and no. I mean, that is slightly putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5.5, because it's not because of his policies on vaccinations that he has had to isolate 6 times. He's had to isolate 6 times because he's followed the rules. And we all know what happens to politicians who don't follow the rules. They get hung, drawn and quartered by public opinion, quite rightly so, when we think about Downing Street parties and so on. So
yeah, but he's nodded these rules through. I mean, the Labour Party, every step of the way, actually, if anything, has demanded that the government go harder and go earlier. So I think these rules are as much Starmer's rules as they are Johnson's rules.
Well, I think you're finding it very useful that Keir Starmer looks to have, you know, not only a mask on his face, but some egg on his face. But as I'm trying to say, I don't see that it's remotely Keir Starmer's fault. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Keir Starmer's, but he's followed the rules. And I do think
it's not his fault. It's not his fault, but it would have been nice for him to maybe look at his situation and use that as an example of why the rules are so mad.
But he has voted the rules through every single time. He has never provided opposition. And when it comes to Plan BS, as I call it, Adam, it's only in place because Labour nodded it through. I'm sorry, Starmer has not provided opposition, and I think Emily's right. Actually, he should be looking at his situation thinking, God, if I was a working class bloke and I wasn't going to be paid if I wasn't able to go to work, I would not be able to put food on my table this week.
And it's not a very good advert for vaccine passports
no.
at all, is it, really?
No.
So, you know, I think that's a major discussion that we've got to have before the 26th of January.
Yeah. But Dan, just sorry to interrupt, but just going back to your Plan BS, which I do like as a joke. But if that hadn't been voted in, are you saying that the NHS would be in a better position now than it is? You know, if Plan B, if we hadn't had any restrictions,
you know what, Daisy?
At all,
I think the NHS would be able to cope because what we saw in Sweden, because what we
they would
saw
still
in
be
Sweden,
off sick.
No, because what we saw in Sweden is that actually human beings adjust their own behaviour.
No, but I'm talking about the Plan B that was voted in just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, but the Plan B, no, exactly, but that's what I'm talking about, because the Plan B, Boris argues, helped change people's behaviour. I would argue that actually people's behaviour would have changed anyway, because a lot of folk and vulnerable folk wouldn't have wanted to catch Omicron, so would have naturally stayed at home. And I am sick of the government trying to legislate how we behave. It's my choice if I want to go to Adam's pub or not. It's not up to Sturgeon. It's not up for
I totally agree with that. But what does really scare me is how the NHS has fallen apart. And now
but it falls apart every year.
No, but not to the extent that we're seeing it now. I mean, the huge numbers of NHS staff who are off with COVID.
But that's policy. That's not down to Omicron.
This is these ridiculous isolation rules, testing rules. Why on earth do we continue to test asymptomatic people who then spend 7 days at home? It used to be 10 days. And producing nothing, no productivity. Our NHS, all our public services are impacted as the moment.
And let's just be honest. We cannot control our behaviour every single winter to protect the NHS. The NHS is an organisation that we pay through the nose for to protect us. And not once, Daisy, over the course of this pandemic, has it actually literally been overwhelmed. Even the Nightingale Hospital lay empty. And so I feel like to scare us in January 2022, and say that the hospitals could be overwhelmed, even though we have 90% vaccination rates of the vulnerable. Actually, it's a sick joke.
But Dan, look at all the hospital trusts that have already said they're in, on emergency footing. Now, I have historically...
Are there any patients who aren't being treated when they have
stroke
emergency
patients being
care?
told to get a taxi. I mean, these people, you know what it's like. I'm not talking about COVID patients. You know how sick people are getting sicker because of lockdown, but now they're getting sicker because the hospitals. Now, over the last 25 years in this job, I've been very critical of the NHS when it's really, really difficult to criticise because it's, the NHS, the holy saint of the public sector. It's really hard to criticise, and that's why politicians never do it, and that's why they never try to sort it out, because it loses votes.
But Daisy, we had Ferguson and Sage projecting in just a week's time between 3,000 and 6,000 deaths a day.
But we now know deaths isn't the problem, it's workforce.
The people who are trying to tell us that the NHS is going to become
I know, but deaths isn't the problem. We know that. It's lack of workforce.
Well, I would say...
other
There's two
people.
things. One, fundamentally, the NHS needs reform. I think we've all seen that through this. There is
Yeah.
no way that the NHS should be under so much stress with just a few weeks of
You could
pressure.
double the money
it's just
and it wouldn't help.
ridiculous.
Of course,
it needs reform.
Of course, because what if there's a pandemic that comes along where we don't have a 90% vaccination rate? No, I couldn't agree more. Emily Carver, Adam Brooks, Daisy McAndrew, my superstar panel. And they are here all night. Coming up, though, after Saint Meghan and Saint Harry raised a pitiful amount for charity. Will this be the moment the world wakes up to their nonsense? Royal author Robert Jobson will tackle that in Crown Jewels. The next in the clash after Djokovic has a nightmare down under. Should sports people be able to compete around the world regardless of vaccination status? Lawrence Fox and microbiologist Sally Jane Cutler have a grand slam next. I want to know what you think too. Email me at dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews and you can vote there in our poll too.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. It is getting cold out there. It's going to be frosty tonight and frosty in the morning. A few fog patches as well. Wet weather then spreads east tomorrow with some snow mixed in, mostly over the hills. That's courtesy of this area of low pressure, but it's not with us yet. A bump in the isobars, a ridge of high pressure, meaning clear skies, and those winds continuing to ease down. So light winds, clear skies this time of night means a frost, a widespread frost forming already, and temperatures are only going to continue to fall. There'll be some fog patches forming as well, of course, parts of the Midlands and southern England too. But the main thing will be those temperatures below freezing, even in towns and cities, well below in rural spots. So a very cold start to Thursday, and then things turn wet across Northern Ireland, some snow on the hills, and then as this wet weather arrives across Scotland, some significant snow likely on the higher routes here, also across parts of Northern England. Some of the higher routes not very pleasant for a time through the course of tomorrow afternoon. We'll turn back to rain as we go through the day. Mostly rain at low levels and across the southwest, where it will actually eventually get to double figures. But East Anglia in the southeast staying cold, but largely dry until the rain pushes in here late afternoon into the evening. It's going to be followed by showers, and those showers turning wintry once more. So we do have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and ice from Thursday evening into Friday morning across northwest England, parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland. The snow could really start to build up here, and as temperatures won't be as low, but still getting close to freezing for Friday morning's commute as the showers continue to come in. Mostly rain at low levels and on the coast, but certainly over any kind of smallish hills, we will see some snow building up during Friday morning in those showers. Scattering of showers elsewhere, but for many central and eastern parts, Friday dry and bright with sunny spells, but it will be cold. Temperatures again below average and feeling colder with the wind.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's time now for Crown Jewels with royal author Robert Jobson. Now, Harry and Meghan claim their Archewell Foundation could help change the world, but it might struggle if they don't start raising more money fast. It was revealed today that the charity brought in a pathetic piddling £50,000 last year, despite being launched with typically nauseating publicity. The Duke and Duchess of Woke actually wasted more money on lawyers wrapping up their UK non-profit Sussex Royal in their ridiculous and futile legal battle with the Mail on Sunday. At least the damages from that pitiful privacy case could help boost the foundation's bank balance. Well, not quite, as today the newspaper was ordered to pay Meghan a whopping £1 in damages for invading her privacy. That's not quite going to change the world, is it? Jobbo, they're all about raising money for themselves and not their charity, it seems like, right?
Well, welcome back, Dan. I think really the reality is that, the charity should have a sort of slogan or a warning, come with a health warning, shouldn't it? That when you're putting money towards their charity, that really a lot of it's going to be wasted on quite ridiculous legal case that didn't even need to take place, as the pound payout suggests. And to actually only have 50,000 that has been given away is simply not good enough, particularly as we've heard more about the name changes and more about the actual charity than probably many charities around the world that are making millions for helping people.
And Jobbo, this £1 settlement just proves, doesn't it, that this was never about anything other than publicity and actually trying to strangle journalism.
Well, the pound settlement, I mean, if we were looking at what realistically should have been paid out if there was a clear breach of privacy, the courts would normally pay out, it's not huge sums usually, but somewhere in the region of 75 to 125,000 would be expected. There's been another figure also paid out as well, but that, there's a discrepancy over what that amount is. But the reality is, it just shows you that Wardy wasn't worth all the bad blood that it created as well. The judges have had to spend hours going over this. The only winners here have been the lawyers who've racked up big fees. And of course, I think her fees have had to be paid by Associated Newspapers in the region of £1 million or so. But that, to me, just seems ridiculous because what was it all about? Really, to me, strikes me that it's all about vanity and control of the media. And, that simply isn't acceptable in modern age, controlling the media. And she failed. And in fact, what she achieved actually in doing this was showing herself to be quite mendacious, and actually she misled the court. And I think that itself was not worth it, was it? And they must be asking themselves as a couple, what was it really all about? Why did we do that? Even with their degree of self-confidence, I think they must be questioning that decision.
And then, Jobby, you look at this charity, right, Archewell, and they claimed all of their work was going to be to change the world when they went to Los Angeles. $50,000, you're not going to be able to do anything with that. What's most shocking is it feels like it's been all about getting money into their own pockets, lining their own pockets, because their deals with Spotify and Netflix and the bank are worth tens of millions. But that's going to them. It's not going to their charity.
Well, I think that it's getting to the stage when you're only giving those sort of figures. There's going to be people looking into what that charity is all about, because that's simply not acceptable, really, at the level that we've been dealing with. I was in South Africa when they started this case against the Mail and the associated newspapers. And one of their big things that they were saying at the time was, we haven't got time, we've really got to get on with our charity. And it was almost as if he was saying, we've got to save the world, we've got so much to do. Well, as you say, Dan, you're not going to save the world with 50,000 in the bank. You've really got to step it up. And they haven't stepped it up. And all it seems to me is that they've spent a lot of time making a lot of noise. And I think that noise has been more about generating money for their personal income and certainly not for the charitable income. It's keeping their name out there so that they can be seen in doing bigger deals. And yet we haven't even seen an awful lot of what they've supposedly done with those deals in Netflix and the other things, that we really haven't seen them do anything apart from talk about themselves.
No, you're completely right. Brilliant analysis, as ever, from royal biographer Robert Jobson. Jobby, thank you so much. Now, coming up, should chilling tales about life in lockdown in China be a wake-up call for all of us? Spiked Online's chief political writer Brendan O'Neill exposes the hell of zero COVID in The Outsider. The next in the clash, after Djokovic has his visa to play at the Australian Open cancelled, should sports people be able to compete around the world regardless of vaccination status? Lawrence Fox and microbiologist Sally Jane Cutler have a grand slam next. And I want to know what you think. Email me at dan@gbnews.uk or tweet me using the handle @gbnews.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Rod Little and Brendan O'Neill on the way, but it's time now for The Clash. And breaking tonight, he's used to back and forth on the court, but in a shocking case of bureaucratic red tape centred around an obsession with vaccine passports, tennis supremo Novak Djokovic's visa to play at the Australian Open has been cancelled, And he's just been told to leave the country after he applied for a vaccine exemption. The world number one was granted a controversial so-called medical exemption from the COVID-19 vaccination to play in this month's tournament. However, he has now been denied entry because of a so-called mix-up. In a bombshell statement, Djokovic's father claimed the athlete had been held under police guard for 5 hours. He said, "This is not just a fight for Novak, but a fight for the whole world. If they don't let him go in half an hour, we will gather on the street. This is a fight for everybody." The decision to grant medical exemption in the first place sparked furious outrage down under, with fans vowing to boycott the tournament. Even Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison took a swipe at Djokovic.
He's not vaccinated. He must provide acceptable proof that he cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons and to be able to access the same travel arrangements as fully vaccinated travellers. So we await his presentation and what evidence he provides to support that. If that evidence is insufficient, then he won't be treated any different to anyone else and he'll be on the next plane home. So there should be no special rules for Novak Djokovic at all, none whatsoever.
Whatever way you look at this, a top athlete is being stopped from doing his job based on whether he's been jabbed. Is that morally right? What do you think? Should sports people be able to compete around the world regardless of vaccination status? Dan at gbnews.uk, at gbnews. You can vote in our poll on Twitter. But to debate this now, I'm joined by Lawrence Fox, leader of the Reclaim Party, who strongly opposes vaccination passports of any form, and Sally Jane Cutler, Professor in Medical Microbiology of the University of East London. So, Lawrence Fox, Djokovic booted out of Australia, presumably because he's unvaccinated. Your view?
Hi Dan. I was really encouraged that a very powerful man stood up against a government. I know people criticising him, stood up against the government and proven that just one voice can make such a huge difference, and that would encourage other voices around the world to do the same. The rest of us with smaller voices, and then to hear that Australia are not going to allow him to defend his own crown makes a mockery of the tournament itself. And this mass formation psychosis that we're in at the moment, this is the clearest manifestation of how damaging it is to us all as a society and a group of people. And I think it's very, very sad news. And Australia is obviously is very deeply in the grips of authoritarian totalitarianism, and it's very, 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 very sad for tennis. It's very sad for freedom, and vaccine passports don't work. No one has proven that a vaccine passport works. And while there are still questions over the efficacy of vaccines, I think everyone should take a chill pill. That's my view.
And Lawrence, surely at some point, we are just going to have to accept that people are going to travel regardless of vaccination status. What, are we going to start having vaccine passports for the 4th jab just because that's what Israel, which is in lockstep with Pfizer, is doing?
Well, at 27, according to Vanessa Feltz, she was keen to have 27 jabs.
And that's fine. She can have her 27. Exactly. It's a choice.
Just don't tell me what I am or am not allowed to put in my body until I feel comfortable doing that. It's the same with children, and it's the same with any other human being. You do not find people who are against vaccine insisting that fat people are locked down. You don't find it. It doesn't happen. We don't go, we should lock down fat people until the NHS doesn't have to deal with that, or smokers like me, or drinkers. It's very, very simple. Personal liberty, personal bodily autonomy is absolutely, without it, you do not have democracy. That's my view.
Sally Jane Cutler, Djokovic is clearly a very fit and healthy human being. And a lot of sports people, rightly or wrongly, believe it's wrong for them while they're competing to put anything foreign into their body. In fact, with the world of performance enhancement drugs, sometimes they're told they're not even allowed to take a Panadol if they've got a headache. Can you understand at all why he's taken this stand?
Well, I find it strange to understand why he's so reluctant to actually have the vaccine. When you actually look at the success of the vaccine and the reduction in hospitalisation, that is surely something that's going to be something that everyone would desire. When you look at the sort of fact that sort of those people who've had the vaccine, they're going to have that protection against hospitalisation and serious consequences. And if you compare that to those people who've actually had COVID, you're looking at sort of a 14-fold increase in risk of sort of heart disease, death, if you've actually had COVID, compared to those people who've been protected through vaccination. So looking at the risks, surely to be protected against those adverse consequences, it's better to actually have the vaccine and get that protection. And if you want to stay fit, you want to play, then again, sort of taking the vaccine is a sensible choice.
Sally, he's had COVID. Djokovic has had COVID-19. As a scientist, would you not say that the natural immunity that he's got from the virus is actually far more effective than a vaccination? Because I imagine that's the argument he was making in order to receive this vaccine exemption.
What we're seeing is the virus is mutating, it's changing. And certainly we're seeing infection in individuals that have previously had alpha or they've had sort of delta, and they're now coming down with Omicron infection because there is not that natural immunity because the virus keeps changing. And so I think really sort of you cannot guarantee that just because you've already had COVID once, that's going to give you protection for years and years to come. That's just not the case because the virus is changing.
Lawrence Fox, the argument would be, though, that Djokovic isn't scared of getting COVID-19, especially not Omicron, which, let's be honest, for a guy as fit as him, is most likely going to be like a common cold, right?
Well, also, what we're witnessing is this huge suppression of free and open debate. When was the last time you remember this many footballers falling over and collapsing, and some in very tragically dying? How honest the government being about the VAERS system? This vaccine, whether you like it or not, has some serious questions around it. And what his position was, which was absolutely brilliant, and I think is fantastic, is it's none of your business. That's what his position was. And if you are vaccinated, you are protected. That's the rule. So either you trust the vaccine or you don't trust the vaccine.
Sally,
if you trust the vaccine, you're protected.
To that, because we've had Matt Letizia on the show recently, and he says there should be an investigation into the footballers and other young males who seem to be picking up myocarditis as a result of the vaccination. So how do you respond to that and to what Lawrence has just said?
Well, I think, first of all, to respond to what Lawrence has just said, he's mentioned the important thing, rules. And this is what Australia is going on about. They have got rules that you need to have the vaccination or you need to have a certified certificate from GPs or other medical practitioners to say why you are exempt. And that's the rules. And he is trying to bypass those rules. He did get a certificate of exemption. I don't know whether it was medically approved, but it wasn't apparently in conjunction with the visa application that had gone through. So that's why he's being sent away again. So basically, that's what's happened there. And we all know what it's like when people don't follow the rules. And look at the uproar when we saw Boris not following the rules that he'd actually
but that's
instigated.
because he made the rules. I mean, I would argue, Lawrence, that the rules are a joke. I mean, and the tyranny, Lawrence, is spreading across the globe. Italy, just today, saying that the over 50s have to be vaccinated. It's mandatory. They may be the rules, Lawrence, but it doesn't mean that they're right morally, right?
A country
well,
decides
you know what they
its
say:
rules.
if something is free, you're the product. That's what I would have. That's what I would have to say about this. And we are ultimately in a mass formation psychosis. We're dealing with Omicron, which is a cold, and we're now stopping the top tennis player on earth of his biological sex, competing to defend his crown. For what reason? Does Australia look like a place you'd like to go on holiday? I'll tell you what, it's not where I'd like to go on holiday. I'm currently sat on the steps outside the airport in Mexico. And in Mexico,
are you?
They don't
oh my
do that.
God, I didn't know that. I'm jealous, Lawrence. I want to be there with you. Sally Jane, I will say, we're risking professional sport, aren't we? Because there's a lot of young footballers, and look, who knows if they're right or wrong, but there's a lot of young footballers ahead of the World Cup who simply ain't going to be vaccinated, and you're not going to be able to tell them to. They're not going to listen to you. So aren't we putting professional sport at risk?
I don't think so. And to answer your previous question that I didn't get a chance to answer, you were asking about the myocarditis. And,
oh, yes, please.
Yes, so what we're actually seeing in the data is some of the early data from the United States, for instance, did suggest that there was an increased risk with myocarditis. But those weren't cohort population-based studies. Those were quite sort of small, sporadic reports that were coming out. It has actually been intensely under the spotlight, and there was a very comprehensive study that's been published from Denmark that was published in the BMJ last month, and basically that was actually finding that they weren't finding a hugely increased risk of myocarditis when they looked. Why
then did Pfizer say after their child trials that a girl had a stomach ache who's now in a wheelchair and who's paralysed out of 1,500 people who were part of the Pfizer trial? Why did they put her down as a stomach ache when she's now paralysed? That's what I'm saying. There's no open debate about this.
No, and
we're
obviously
not allowed to talk about it.
We haven't put that specific case to Pfizer tonight, Lawrence, and we will do that, of course. But you know, what I agree with you about is we have to have a conversation about this, because even some of the sports people who were prepared to have the double jab for the good of society are going to start looking at what's happening in Israel and say, what? You want me to have 4? And I've had COVID twice? And I'm young and I'm healthy? I think we have to keep having this conversation. And thank you for doing it tonight so respectfully. That is Lawrence Fox from Mexico. I'm jealous. Get back safely, Lawrence, leader of the Reclaim Party. And Professor Sally Jane Cutler, who is a professor of medical microbiology at the University of East London. So who do you agree with? Keith on Twitter on this says, yes, they should be allowed, and also we should be allowed to travel anywhere, regardless of our vaccination status. But Becky says, don't blame the sports player, blame the ridiculous rules in the first place. And this from Danny. A sports person should follow the rules and laws of the country the competition is held in. And if they aren't able to do that, they shouldn't be allowed to enter. They shouldn't be treated any differently from any other person. Of course, that's why Djokovic has just been booted and he won't be able to play at the Australian Open. Your verdict is now in. 49% of you agree that athletes should be able to compete across the world, regardless of their vaccine status, while 51% of you say, no. Scott Morrison was right, and Djokovic should get out of Australia. So we're a divided society on this one, and that's why we're going to continue to have debates like the one we just had, because believe me, you won't see that on the BBC. Coming up, and I can't wait for this one, Loose Women star and campaigner Denise Welch joins me in the studio to call for mercy for the mentally vulnerable struggling with cruel COVID rules. But next, should the horrors of lockdown China be a wake-up call for all of us? And do zero COVID zealots who want us to suffer similar treatment be held to account? Brendan O'Neill joins me on this straight after the break in The Outsider.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. It is getting cold out there. It's going to be frosty tonight and frosty in the morning. A few fog patches as well. Wet weather then spreads east tomorrow with some snow mixed in. mostly over the hills. That's courtesy of this area of low pressure, but it's not with us yet. A bump in the isobars, a ridge of high pressure, meaning clear skies, and those winds continuing to ease down. So light winds, clear skies this time of night means a frost, a widespread frost forming already, and temperatures are only going to continue to fall. There'll be some fog patches forming as well, of course, parts of the Midlands and southern England too. But the main thing will be those temperatures below freezing, even in towns and cities, well below in rural spots. So a very cold start to Thursday, and then things turn wet across Northern Ireland, some snow on the hills, and then as this wet weather arrives across Scotland, some significant snow likely on the higher routes here, also across parts of Northern England. Some of the higher routes not very pleasant for a time through the course of tomorrow afternoon. We'll turn back to rain as we go through the day. Mostly rain at low levels and across the southwest, where it will actually eventually get to double figures. But East Anglia in the southeast staying cold, but largely dry until the rain pushes in here late afternoon into the evening. It's going to be followed by showers, and those showers turning wintry once more. So we do have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and ice from Thursday evening into Friday morning across northwest England, parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland. The snow could really start to build up here, and as temperatures won't be as low but still getting close to freezing, could lead to some icy conditions, particularly for Friday morning's commute as the showers continue to come in. Mostly rain at low levels and on the coast, but certainly over any kind of smallish hills we will see some snow building up during Friday morning in those showers. A scattering of showers elsewhere, but for many central and eastern parts, Friday dry and bright with sunny spells, but it will be cold. Temperatures again below average and feeling colder with the wind.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Denise Welsh and Rod Liddle on the way, but Brendan O'Neill is tonight's outsider. And horrific scenes have been emerging from China, where there's the world's strictest lockdown, banning people from leaving their homes altogether. Public shaming has been taking place. These pictures show Chinese police allegedly parading violators of the lockdown around the streets dressed in hazmat suits. And starving Chinese residents have been begging for food on social media, with this footage showing locals arguing with police over the lack of supplies. Brendan O'Neill joins me now. And Brendan, you've written so powerfully about this completely terrible situation on your latest column for Spiked Online. I mean, China, which obviously delivered the virus to the world, is now so obsessed with wiping it out, they have become a zero COVID hell state. Tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, I think China really shows up the hell of zero COVID, as you say, because it is a zero COVID country, which means that China's policy is to prevent any kind of spread of COVID at all. It has incredibly strict border controls. If there are even 2 or 3 cases of COVID in a city, millions of people get locked down. And in one city now, in northwest China, people are utterly forbidden from leaving their homes. They can't even go out to buy food. And they've been in that situation for about 10 or 11 days now. Food is being delivered to them by the authorities. But of course, the authorities in every country on earth get things wrong. And some people don't have enough food. Some people say they've received no food. And people are swapping things like sanitary towels and even console systems for food. This is the situation people find themselves in, the zero COVID tyranny. It's really quite scary.
And Brendan, what do you think the motivation for the communist Chinese government is here? Is it almost to prove, OK, we screwed all of you over because you're still grappling to come to terms with this thing, but we can wipe it out? Is it about almost having that to boast about, or is there another motivation here?
But it's hard to work it out, really. I mean, one issue is that China is, of course, an authoritarian country, so it behaves in an authoritarian way, and it has few qualms about completely depriving people of liberty, even the liberty to go outside their front door. So it's more relaxed about that than some countries in the West have been. Although let's not forget that Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial boasted in an interview with the Times last year, or the year before rather, that he thought it was quite good that the West could copy China and go into lockdown in March 2020. So that's pretty worrying in itself. But I think one thing about China is that the administration there, the authoritarian administration, has been pointing to countries in the West and saying the fact that they've got COVID all over the place really shows how incompetent those countries are. So it's kind of gambled its reputation on making sure that there is no COVID at all in the country. And so it's going to stick to this zero COVID tyranny for quite a long time. But it's obviously causing enormous difficulties for ordinary people. And I think it shows how crazy public health fanaticism can become if we don't get a grip on it.
Well, indeed, and it's so disturbing, isn't it, Brendan, that so many Western democracies, us to an extent, but especially if you look at Australia and New Zealand and Austria and now Italy, I mean, they're following the CCP playbook in some ways.
That's right, and particularly Australia and New Zealand, which also had zero COVID policies, but have lately realised that it's just not possible. It's just not possible to keep COVID away from your country forever and ever. And in fact, one problem that's caused by these policies is that people's biological ability to deal with COVID when it eventually arrives is actually lessened by the fact that they are never exposed to it. That's another problem they have in China, that there has been so little exposure to COVID that when it does arrive, it's going to cause them some problems. But I think it's really worth remembering that we have zero COVID fanatics here in the UK as well. Yeah. And we cannot let them off the hook. These are the people who wanted to shut down every aspect of life until COVID was eliminated. That was a deranged policy. It would have been incredibly authoritarian, and we have to call those people to account.
Devi Schroeder, independent sage, we don't forget. And Brendan O'Neill, it was an absolutely brilliant piece. Keep fighting against zero COVID, please, and we'll speak again next week. It is 10 p.m. This is Dan Wootton tonight. Still to come, as an MP makes this heartbreaking plea to Boris Johnson in Parliament.
Does he agree with me that the human rights of disabled people, sick people and the elderly are not fair weather luxuries, and that everyone with dementia, wherever they live, has the right to family life?
Loose Women star and mental health advocate Denise Welsh is in the studio very soon to explain why she is campaigning against cruel and inhumane COVID restrictions. As the Omicron data proves doomsday scientists and lockdown fanatics were wrong to mask up kids and call for even tougher restrictions, Have we left science behind when it comes to COVID regulations? The brilliant columnist Rod Liddle gives his uncompromising take in Uncancelled at 10:40. Is an Essex school wrong to axe the courageous J.K. Rowling as the name of a house and replace her with Dame Kelly Holmes? Plus, my superstar panel look at the acquittal of the so-called Colston 4, who toppled a statue of Edward Colston. And what lengths has this man gone to save himself from an arranged marriage?
I'm 29, living La Vida London. I am an entrepreneur, I'm a foodie.
He looks like a catch. We'll find out why he's gone this far as the media buzz continues. But don't go anywhere, because next we'll have a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages too. And at 10:50, of course, we crown today's greatest Britain and Union Jackass. But before all of that, the news at 10 with Polly Middlehurst.
Very good evening. COVID measures have been updated right across Britain. Pre-departure PCR tests for travellers returning to England and Wales from abroad are going to be scrapped. And from next week, people who test positive with a lateral flow test who are asymptomatic won't need to take a PCR test to begin isolation. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, also confirmed the isolation period will be cut from 10 days to 7. In the last half hour, Novak Djokovic has had his visa revoked by the Australian government and a letter has been issued for his deportation. The world number one has been stranded at Melbourne Airport for the last several hours before Australian Border Force confirmed he failed to provide appropriate evidence to meet the country's entry requirement. Djokovic refused to reveal whether or not he'd had the COVID vaccine. He had been filing a federal injunction to stop his deportation. In Munich, several hundred people have taken to the streets in protest against COVID measures. During a so-called Corona walk, a crowd of demonstrators, mostly without masks, chanted freedom as they marched near the central square in the German city. This comes as the number of daily infections in the country started to rise a week ago, despite new measures being put in place, including showing proof of vaccination for many indoor activities. Away from COVID, Boris Johnson has defended the government's financial support for vulnerable people during the pandemic. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner stood up for Sir Keir Starmer, who has tested positive for COVID, and she warned millions of British workers are facing a further pay cut and a tax hike, with inflation at its highest level since the early 90s.
His government has failed to invest in long-term energy security. His government decided to let gas storages collapse. His government let the energy market run out of control. 27 energy companies have gone bust in the last year. And now household bills are going through the roof.
Angela Rayner. Well, Boris Johnson retaliated today, saying record numbers of people are now in work, and he backed his party's warm homes discount, winter fuel and cold weather payments.
2.2 million people supported with the Warm Homes discount, Mr. Speaker, worth £140 per week, which we introduced. Pensioners supported with the £300 winter fuel payments, Mr. Speaker. Cold weather payments worth £25 a week for 4 million people up and down the country, Mr. Speaker.
That from a very lively PMQs this morning. So, 4 people have been cleared of criminal damage after pulling down the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. The memorial to the slave trader was toppled and thrown in the harbour during the Black Lives Matter protest in June last year. All 4 defendants admitted being involved but denied their actions were criminal. You're right up to date. I'm back in an hour. See you then. Now back to Dan.
Tomorrow's News Tonight now on our Media Buzz. Very first look now at the newspaper front pages hot off the press. Just one in so far, and it's the Daily Telegraph. Leading on the story we're going to be talking about very shortly, the Colston 4 walk free as jury says no crime was committed. This is after 4 Black Lives Matter activists who admitted toppling the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol in the summer of 2020 walked free. My superstar panel back with me now. It is the columnist and broadcaster Emily Carver tonight. Publican and social media sensation Adam Brooks and the political and royal commentator Daisy McAndrew. Now, in the last 24 hours, there have been 2 more cancellation attempts launched against the already embattled J.K. Rowling. The first comes from former host of The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, who has accused Rowling of anti-Semitism over her depiction of goblins in Harry Potter, who run something, by the way, I haven't read a word of Harry Potter, you're going to have to forgive me, Gringotts Wizarding Bank? Am I right? Okay, I'm right, have a listen.
It's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I just want to show you a caricature. And they're like, oh, look at that. That's from Harry Potter. And you're like, no, that's a caricature of a Jew from an anti-Semitic piece of literature. J.K. Rowling was like, can we get these guys to run our bank? And you're like, it's a wizarding world. It's a world where it's
you can imagine anything.
The train station has a half a thing and no one can see it. And we can ride dragons and you've got a pet owl.
And who runs the bank?
Who should run the bank? Jews.
The second swipe at the author came from an Essex secondary school that has dropped Rowling's name as a title for one of its houses over her comments and viewpoints surrounding trans people. The house has been renamed after the Olympic athletics champion Dame Kelly Holmes. Well, as I say in my Mail Online column, isn't that ironic, given that Holmes has also been criticised for supporting a campaign in 2019 that said sports women were at a clear disadvantage against trans competitors? Another common-sense position that has been weaponised by trans activists. I imagine it's only a matter of time before Holmes is axed too and replaced by Eddie Izzard. So, my superstar panel. Was this school wrong, Daisy McAndrew, to axe J.K. Rowling?
My view on all of these stories, whether it's actually renaming schools or houses in schools, or whether it's toppling statues, or whether any of these sort of cancel culture war issues where something is renamed, like a house in a school, or whatever it might be, is that I always believe it should be democratic and not just a few do-gooders or a few people who say that they're talking.
The school says that the pupils raised an issue about the name.
Well, they say that the pupils raised an issue, and then they say, and this was, to me, was the important bit, because I thought, yeah, I bet they did. My initial reaction was, I'm sure they did. It was probably, a couple of prefects and a few teachers, and they got together and decided.
A few little woke kids.
I then did read that there was an all-school vote, and I thought, well, OK, for me, that's better, because that is more democracy, because I don't like things being changed without everybody being asked. And I thought, well, actually, if I was a kid at that school, would I put my hand up and say, actually, I'm a big fan of J.K. Rowling? No, I probably wouldn't, because you'd be so worried about the reaction of everybody else.
Scared of the mob. And this is the mob. It is the cancel culture mob. I think this school is gutless and pathetic for this decision. I actually feel like J.K. Rowling is fast becoming one of our greatest Britons, actually, because despite losing everything when it comes to polite society, she says, I don't care.
I completely agree. And the fact that people are trying to now slander her and say that she's an anti-Semite, it's clearly just a continuation of the criticism that she's had over her comments on trans people, which, if we remember, if you've read anything about what J.K. Rowling believes on this subject, she's caring and very loving about it. All she says, all she ever states is that biological sex exists.
Yeah, she says trans lives matter.
Yes. She doesn't try to deny that people may wish to, identify as trans. She never does that. But these schools, I mean, since when did head teachers cow down to a bunch of pupils who are probably less than 16 years old, who have decided that off the back of probably what they've seen on social media, that this woman needs to be removed from their school?
They should be told J.K. Rowling is the author of the most successful book series in history. She overcame adversity. She came from a relatively deprived background in Scotland, and she is someone you should be looking up to, not someone you should be cancelling.
But may I just add, I was recently at a school and I was doing a talk on free speech, and there was one young lady in the audience who was watching who simply said that people should not be allowed, and that no one should be allowed to say, essentially, what J.K. Rowling has said. And these young students, I'm sure that not all of the pupils in that room agreed with this girl, but she was the one that spoke the loudest. This is how cancel culture is allowed to, happen.
We're doing what Britain does, aren't we? We're attacking our most successful people.
Yeah.
And we're always putting down our best. And that's a terrible trait that this country seems to have.
Right, and this school is
growing with the youngsters.
I know, and it's in your neck of the woods, which is most surprising.
Very disappointed that they're in Essex.
Boswell's school in Chelmsford, because, you know, I love the people of Essex. My mum's obviously from Essex, and actually Essex is one of those great places in the country which is, on the whole, against cancel culture. I think it's because it's a performing arts school.
I had a nightclub around the corner from there, Dan.
Did you?
Yeah. I had a nightclub in Chelmsford. But
I will say just about the Jon Stewart thing quickly. At least he had the balls to come out today and say he doesn't believe that J.K. Rowling actually is anti-Semitic and he was making light-hearted comments. Because it does just feel at the moment everyone who is anyone in the world of entertainment wants to distance themselves from J.K.
But a light-hearted comment snowballs into a movement, doesn't it? We see that. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to take those light-hearted comments, and forever now she's going to be known as an anti-Semite.
I know, and to be honest, we played the clip in context, and Emily, it didn't seem very light-hearted to me. That's all
No, I mean, that's just because he realised that he went a little bit too far. And now he's worried about the backlash that he's had. It's like we just ping-pong, don't we?
No,
From
we do.
one extreme to the other.
Trying to avoid cancellation.
Well, actually, talking about, because you said earlier about, you know, and she's been cancelled or maybe, you know, and lost everything. Of course, fundamentally, she's still a multi-millionaire. Now, good for her. I don't begrudge her money at all. But actually, it's the people who get cancelled who aren't millionaires who need to be protected.
Well, actually, in this column that I wrote, I said she's one of the few figures who has been rendered uncancelable because
she's too big.
Actually she's too successful, but most of us aren't. And
people with money still have feelings. You know, let's not...
Of course.
She might be a multi-billionaire, whatever she is, but...
No, exactly, but at least she's not going to lose her house.
No, exactly that.
People like
that's all I
her
meant.
and Ricky Gervais and all the others who stand up and actually say that they believe in free
that's so
speech
important.
and free thought.
That's so
important because they can.
Now, Omicron has been a drag for New Yorkers, but not for their hypocritical Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the so-called squad member who has been a staunch advocate for mask wearing during the pandemic and all of those harsh restrictions in New York, was spotted partying at a packed drag bar in Miami on Sunday. Wait for it, without a face covering. In the short but detrimental clips posted to social media, the Democratic Socialist representative can be seen waving to other bargoers, even getting a big kiss from the Broadway star Billy Porter. The footage has been very hard for folk to swallow as AOC's home state of New York continues to be hammered by record high numbers of COVID-19 cases and faces an indoor mask mandate for one more month. Of course, there's no mask mandates in place in the state of Florida, even though the state's cases have increased dramatically. AOC has been accused by disgusted onlookers of frolicking in free Florida, and I think it shows that she is a big, fat hypocrite. Also shows, Adam Brooks, doesn't it? Vaccine passports don't work because they've got them in New York and the cases are sky high.
Exactly that. Exactly that.
Adam Brooks, Emily Carver, Daisy McAndrew do stand by because coming up is the acquittal of the vandals who tore down a statue of Edward Colston. A green light for more political vandalism. I'll put that to my panel in the Media Buzz and we'll look at more of tomorrow's newspaper front pages too. But next, why has it taken this long for folk to question the COVID narrative? And is it too little too late? Broadcaster and mental health advocate Denise Welsh sits down with me after the break. You don't want to miss that.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. It is getting cold out there. It's going to be frosty tonight and frosty in the morning. A few fog patches as well. Wet weather then spreads east tomorrow with some snow mixed in, mostly over the hills. That's courtesy of this area of low pressure, but it's not with us yet. A bump in the isobars, a ridge of high pressure, meaning clear skies, and those winds continuing to ease down. So light winds, clear skies this time of night means a frost, a widespread frost forming already, and temperatures are only going to continue to fall. There'll be some fog patches forming as well, of course, parts of the Midlands and southern England too. But the main thing will be those temperatures below freezing, even in towns and cities, well below in rural spots. So a very cold start to Thursday, and then things turn wet across Northern Ireland, some snow on the hills. And then as this wet weather arrives across Scotland, some significant snow likely on the higher routes here, also across parts of Northern England. Some of the higher routes not very pleasant for a time through the course of tomorrow afternoon. We'll turn back to rain as we go through the day. Mostly rain at low levels and across the southwest, where it will actually eventually get to double figures. But East Anglia in the southeast staying cold, but largely dry until the rain pushes in here late afternoon into the evening. It's going to be followed by showers, and those showers turning wintry once more. So we do have another Met Office yellow warning for snow and ice from Thursday evening into Friday morning across northwest England, parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland. The snow could really start to build up here, and as temperatures won't be as low, but still getting close to freezing, could lead to some icy conditions, particularly for Friday morning's commute as the showers continue to come in. Mostly rain at low levels and on the coast, but certainly over any kind of smallish hills, we will see some snow building up during Friday morning in those showers. Scattering of showers elsewhere, but for many central and eastern parts, Friday dry and bright with sunny spells, but it will be cold. Temperatures again below average and feeling colder with the wind.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
And we're back. At certain times over the past long 22 months, it seems we've forgotten basic humanity when introducing cruel COVID restrictions, especially when it comes to denying families precious final moments with their loved ones. Plaid Cymru MP Liz Saville-Roberts made an emotional plea to Boris Johnson at PMQs today to end the separation and isolation of dementia patients like her mother.
I was called to sit with her in hospital on Monday because of a COVID staff shortage, but I fear that myself, like many of our constituents in similar circumstances, are likely to be separated indefinitely when she is moved into an EMI nursing home. There remain many care homes and hospitals where even the most minimal visits can be denied, leading to isolation and separation, which cause irreversible damage to well-being. Does he agree with me that the human rights of disabled people, sick people, and the elderly are not fair weather luxuries, and that everyone with dementia, wherever they live, has the right to family life?
I'm sure the whole House and everybody who's listened will have shared her feelings and simply wish to extend their condolences as in view of her mother's current condition.
Well, Denise Welch, who is a household name thanks to her starring role on Coronation Street and regular spot on the Loose Women panel, has become one of the most effective voices fighting against inhumane regulations having a disastrous impact on the psychological health of the nation throughout the pandemic. And Denise joins me now. Denise, absolutely heartbreaking watching that from Liz Saville-Roberts. You lost your father recently.
I did, September, yeah.
Condolences.
Thank you.
Why are we putting people through this again?
Dan, it's one of the reasons that I started talking out about this. If I can just précis, because sometimes people ask me why I became so committed to this cause. And it always stems from my work as an ambassador for a spokesperson for mental health because of my own mental illness that I've had, as you well know, for over 30 years. And I was aware very early on that this was going to become a pandemic of the mentally ill, or certainly mental health crisis, because we've never had parity for physical and mental health before. And mine started as long ago in the first lockdown when the bridge meetings were happening. So we were all outside clapping for carers, which we all love to do, and we were told to be at our doors with a pot and a pan, and we clapped for carers. Meanwhile, for 4 to 5 weeks, Westminster Bridge, outside Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, crowds gathered, including the emergency services, the ambulances, the police, the fire engines, creating a carnival atmosphere. All the nurses came pouring out the hospital, and suddenly COVID disappeared on a Thursday night. Now, if you ever said anything against the NHS, you were akin to a murderer. And I remember thinking then, hang on, I smell massive BS here, because at the same time, people were being threatened with arrest for comforting a relative who had lost their husband of 50 years. They were threatened with arrest for coming near them. While on a Thursday night, people took the karaoke machines down and a doi-doi-doi and bottles of wine, and a picnic happened, and I thought, nah. This is not happening. And I saw the hypocrisy. And as you know, once you've seen the emperor with no clothes, you can't see him with them back on again. Then, of course, I was aware that the visiting was stopping. We all understood that there had to be certain precautions taken. But my dad died in September. He took ill last Christmas Day. Another reason why I'm glad I broke the rules last Christmas Day, because it turned out to be my dad's last Christmas. And had I not driven with a dry mouth up the motorway, breaking the law, thinking I might be arrested, I wouldn't have spent my last Christmas with my dad. And so many people didn't break the rules because of this fear, this crazy, insane fear that has been instilled in people. Now they're stopping the visiting again. Dan, my dad died of pneumonia, separate to what he'd been in for, which was a gallbladder thing that lots of things went wrong, which was nobody's fault. And he was in several hospitals over that time in the northeast. We weren't able to visit quite a lot of the time, and it was possibly the most heartbreaking thing that I have ever been through in my entire life. And what upset me was that there was at the time that my dad was in one particular hospital and we couldn't visit for a month, there was hardly any COVID in the hospital. Now, we can listen to the NHS chiefs and we can listen to the government, but when you're talking to the people on the shop floor who say to you, there is hardly any COVID in the hospital, but they have made a blanket ban over a certain area of the northeast. And I was having to talk to my dad in tears on FaceTime over the phone. When I was able, my sister and I spent many months when we could be in the hospital. Often we couldn't be in together. And some nurses were fabulous, some weren't fabulous. It's like in any business. They're not all wonderful. Some were incredible. Some of the doctors, I wouldn't want to ever be in their care because of their bedside manner. Personally, some were absolutely wonderful. But if my sister and I hadn't been in those hospitals with my dad at certain times, he would have died, without a shadow of a doubt. And that's because it's so integral in a busy hospital. Sometimes it was busy, sometimes it wasn't busy. That things like you're looking after your family's dehydration. There were times that we would have to say, my dad's cognitive skills are going again. Are you sure that you've checked that he hasn't got a urine infection? Oh, let's just look at the notes here. Oh, we haven't really checked that for 2 weeks. We'll check it. Urine infection comes back. Of course he's got one. And that's why he was deteriorating. His advocate. I spoke to, before I came tonight, someone who I've become friendly with over this period, who runs a care home. She co-runs a care home in Surrey. I've spoken to the residents I judged their Easter competition, their Christmas competition, visitation, all online, obviously. Fabulous bunch of people. Have they suffered with COVID? Yes, they have. They are currently allowed to have, they allow them they can only have 3 separate visitors. They have to visit in the room, but they are allowing those people to stay for as long as they want. But some people, some homes are now making blanket bans. Dan, those residents aren't worried about Omicron. They're worried about being kept away from their family in what is likely to be certainly the last couple of years, 6 months of their lives. This is a milder variant. Yes, of course, it's worse for some people. But I think we all know now, and people can go, you're not a virologist, you're not an epidemiologist. I speak to those people, though. You and I know who we speak to on a regular basis. I don't come on and say it because Joan from Facebook has said it. I'm not stupid. So I know and the fact is that these things can be managed in most cases. I understand that care homes are scared of COVID, but the fact is that these people are going to die lonely deaths if they don't get to see their families and friends. And it is the hill that I will die on, is this trying to advocate in a small way to take the fear out of people's lives. We can't go on like this. It's insane.
No, we can't. And it worries me that we haven't learned lessons fast enough. And I think one of the things that probably angers me most is that people who have been critical of lockdown have been accused in much of the mainstream media of somehow being
being COVID deniers.
And also not caring about people's health or not caring about the numbers of death. And it's like, no, all we're trying to do is say there's a lot of health problems and there's a lot of death being caused by lockdown.
Absolutely. And some of us spotted this earlier. And of course, a lot of people are sort of coming round to that.
Now.
I mean, it's not like we knew everything. Of course we don't. And of course, but they say follow the science. Which scientists? They're on complete opposing ends, a lot of it. But the thing with lockdown, and what I say now is to those people who seem to be advocating for that, is that there is no doubt the NHS is stressed, of course, because of all the staff shortages, because people are having to stay home who aren't even poorly, because they've got a positive test, which hopefully we can limit that time now, because it's not sustainable to go on like that. But the fact is that the collateral damage of lockdown has been absolutely horrendous. I think it's OK. If we lock down, I can go home with my husband, with my garden, albeit a small one, and I can bake a banana bread and everything's fine. I've spoken to people who live in a tenement block in the middle of Newcastle. They have a violent partner. They have 3 children. They have not a you-know-what to you-know-what in. They have nothing. And when they have this constant sword of Damocles of we might go into lockdown, it is the most terrifying thing. Christina works for me. One of the people she knows in Wythenshawe has taken their own life yesterday because they're living in fear of all the time.
And baby Arthur.
Yeah, absolutely. The paramedics, Dan, in the northeast, who I speak to, said that some nights, 70% of their call-outs are mental health distress calls. And we are putting a veil over this. I know it's not easy. I know it's difficult. But the fact is that we can't live our lives just constantly propping up the NHS. And I will not be accused of it being our fault or COVID's fault when I've seen it from the inside. These NHS wonderful nurses and doctors are propping up this absolute disaster of a system where there is no communication between wards, there is no communication between doctors and nurses, there is no communication between doctors and patients. My dad was told he had cancer, then he didn't have cancer, that he was going to have surgery, then he was going home the next day, and I'm going, where's the umbrella over all of this? What is happening here? And that was when there wasn't a lot of COVID in there.
The other issue, Denise, no, it's so important. The other huge issue, of course, is the way that fear has been spread. And obviously we see it constantly with the folk who I call the doomsday duo, Whitty and Valence, and you've then got
and many of the TV
Professor
presenters.
Ferguson. Well, yes, and that's what I was going to say. It's then spread by the media, who almost make it worse, Denise. Why do you think the mainstream media, especially the lockdown fanatics at the BBC, have become so desperate for more restrictions? They want more restrictions.
You tell me. You and I have had our run-ins over the years when you were working as, we really have. We've disagreed on many, many things.
And I think that's important to be able to disagree.
I think it's very important. And
respect.
Respect, absolutely. I think the media coverage has been the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my entire life of this pandemic. It is like they absolutely, as soon as after the first wave, and we had those very terrifying nightly conferences, and it was all the deaths and deaths and deaths and deaths. And of course it was important to know what was going on. But I also was very vocal about saying, but every day 500 people die of cancer, 500 people die of heart disease. You know, we can't mentally take these deaths all the time.
But the BBC run the stats, the COVID stats every day, even now.
As soon as the deaths went down, it became cases.
Yeah.
It became about cases, and the cases don't matter. They certainly didn't matter so much, but it's almost that. But people seem, you know, obviously the click on.
But is it because it rates? Is it?
Of course, it's because it
rates.
Fear
sells.
Of course, it sells. There's some people who don't want this to go away, but also there has become a Covidian cult amongst normal people who don't want to. In 2020, when the first wave went away, I wasn't trying to say COVID's never coming back again. How do I know? All I was saying is we're learning a lot. They're proning patients. I've heard from doctors instead of ventilating. We now have the new drugs which are helping people who are in, you know, very serious illness. So we shouldn't go back to how it was. And I would say things like I would discover that, say, a hospital in the north had no COVID patients for 12 weeks. So I would do my research on that. I would then tweet such and such a hospital is delighted that they've had no COVID for 12 weeks. I always remember Pauline, whoever she is, putting, "You're grotesque." Oh. And I thought, oh my God, I'm sorry that there aren't enough deaths, Pauline, for me to announce at this point, you know. And there is this.
But even this week, you've got Sturgeon still trying to terrify Scots, failing to mention the fact that there has been one patient in a Scottish hospital with Omicron. Since the outbreak. One. 0 deaths, one patient in intensive care.
But what I don't understand, Dan, is what is the aim? We know that zero COVID isn't a possibility. And why is Nicola Sturgeon not seeing the collateral damage that it's doing to people? What about Mark Dreyford in Wales? What about him? And also, why are so many people still going along with it and not being vocal when they've seen the hypocrisy that we've had with all the number 10
Well, do you sense a change
parties
now, though? Do you sense a change?
Well, I sense a genuine change in some people. I sense a running with the fox and chasing with the hounds in some high-profile people who want to be on the right side
of history,
of history, which I believe. Obviously, if you speak out, you know, about against lockdowns, I've never died on the vaccine hill. I'm vaccinated, as you know. I'm pro-choice, but I'm vaccinated. But you know, if you speak out about this, even though you know you are declared to be this kind of rampant Trump supporter,
an anti-vax weirdo, and as we know, you're on the left side of politics.
I've always been left
and that's
of
often
centre.
what we disagree about.
Having said that, I am completely and utterly disillusioned by that. By the wokery that's going on, by the fact that so many of my left-wing compatriots, I thought, in the air have been totally silent about this, when our industry is the one that's most affected by these restrictions, when nobody's getting any money, you know. I was very vocal trying to support Excluded UK because some of the people in my industry, I don't just mean people in front of the camera or on stage, it's all of the technicians, it's the front of house, it's a huge
the stagehands who didn't work for
thousands and thousands of people. Well, but if they'd had a good year, a year before, they had no money, and they get no money when the shows come off now. So anyway.
Well, look, Denise, I have so much respect for you. We have disagreed on a lot, but I've always respected you, but especially over the past 22 months. And I'll tell you why. You didn't have to do this. There's no financial gain for you doing this. In fact,
really
you have probably lost work as a result of this. So thank you for speaking up, because you do speak for millions. And
thank you very much.
Talking to Denise Welsh. Coming up, as the Omicron overreaction continues, have we left science behind when it comes to COVID regulations? Columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddell joins me in Uncancelled. But next, my panel gets stuck into the story of the day as the Colston 4 are acquitted, and take a look at more of tomorrow's newspaper front pages and the media buzz. That's straight after the break.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Let's return to tomorrow's news tonight now in our Media Buzz. Lots of front pages have just been delivered. Let's go to the Metro first. Just go with your flow. That's because earlier today, Boris Johnson announced an easing to COVID testing rules after Omicron cases left 1 in 15 infected and more than 1 million people self-isolating within days. Fully jabbed travellers will no longer take a pre-departure test or self-isolate when arriving in England. Hallelujah, because it means that you're not necessarily going to be stuck overseas if you get the cron. The Sun reports the Tory parent bra tycoon Michelle Mone is to be questioned by police over a claim that she sent a racist text message. The 50-year-old millionaire has been asked to attend a police station to be interviewed under caution. Lady Mone, we should stress, has not been arrested. The Daily Mirror are calling it a perfect storm. They claim that the NHS is facing a crisis with soaring staff absences and a huge rise in COVID patients. Very interesting, actually, because I'll say the Daily Mirror is doing exactly what Denise Welsh was just talking about before the break, scaremongering. And in the Daily Star, it's the Blair Ditch Project. Great headline. 750,000 have now signed a petition to stop former Prime Minister Blair from receiving a knighthood. Families of heroes from the Iraq War are now imploring the Queen to prevent Blair from being knighted. The Guardian lead on the big news that a foursome who were charged with criminal damage after a statue of Edward Colston was pulled down have been cleared. And before we get more into that, let me reintroduce my superstar panel. Tonight it's the columnist and broadcaster Emily Carver, publican and social media sensation Adam Brooks, and the political and royal media commentator Daisy McAndrew.
I love the way he goes, sensation.
He's a sensation. He's now a GB News sensation. Now look, as we were just talking about, the Colston Monument was thrown into Bristol Harbour over his slave trade links. And the gang were acquitted after a Black Lives Matter protest in June 2020 spiralled into anarchy. Here's what one of them, Rhiannon Graham, had to say outside Bristol Crown Court earlier.
We just want to say thank you to so many people because we have never been alone in this journey. We've been so supported and we are, we're such a small part of this, really. Everybody on the day, those 10,000 people that marched the streets of Bristol in the name of equality, for our love. Exactly. All the road pullers, the statue climbers.
Yes, folks, it's anarchy in the UK. Nothing to celebrate. Here's another member of the group. She's called Sage Willoughby. Wonder what her parents are like, speaking outside court and denying they were trying to edit history.
What do you say to people who You say you can't change history, and these monuments are part of history, and they shouldn't be pulled down.
We didn't change history.
Yes.
They were whitewashing history by calling him a virtuous man. Sorry to swear. We didn't change history. We rectified history.
Oh, what great people they are. I think this sets an astonishing precedent for those getting involved in direct action. It's true that Colston was a slave trader, but what's next? Is any public monument or building safe? As tomorrow's edition of the Daily Express, which has just dropped, asks, where will it all end, Emily Cover?
Well, I mean, there's a very large statue in Highgate Cemetery nearby where I live that I find problematic. Perhaps I should set...
You're referring to Marx?
Yeah, I'm referring to Karl Marx. If anyone's been there, it's absolutely huge.
Yes.
I find communism and Marxism very, very problematic. So perhaps this sets a precedent for me to take some direct action.
You can just
there.
tear it down
But it's
and you're going to be
ridiculous.
free.
I mean, the prosecution said it's a simple case of criminal damage. And the defence was that, no, apparently it's
You've
a
got to
hate
be on the
crime.
right. And they also said, and I thought this was critical, you've got to be on the right side of history. Actually, that's not what we ask our juries to decide. We just ask our juries to follow the law.
Exactly, and they said that the statue was just existing, was a hate crime. And so, therefore, that justified it coming down.
Daisy McAndrew, you disagree?
I disagree too. Obviously, when it comes to the bald facts of the law, it's very, very difficult to defend people who have committed crimes. Now, one of the defences, the police didn't remotely try to stop them, as the police admitted.
That's very true.
The police were shameful that day.
However, as I was saying about J.K. Rowling, and as I've bored you senseless, Dan, over the last few months, you know, I do always say I want it to come down to what the local people want. And the local people of Bristol definitely wanted the statue down. They wanted the hall's names changed. They wanted the schools' names changed. But the council had been appalling about it. What had happened?
Well, democracy sometimes takes time.
Democracy can also be really rubbish sometimes, because often it's all about, I want money for my pet project, so I don't want to waste money. I'm going to ignore what the public want. There had been so many polls of Bristolians. There had been so many phone-ins, so many letters sent, so many councillors.
Those guys standing there are not freedom fighters.
But it's not about... It's not about...
They're anarchists.
Yes, the court...
They're anarchists.
They're just bored young people who clearly have nothing better to do.
This is selected democracy.
Adam Brooks,
they don't represent the whole
not
of Bristol.
them, no, but their opinion about Colston. Now, of course, they were the ones who were extreme enough to do something about it.
There was no rush. There was no rush. I mean, Adam Brooks, if people want to essentially rewrite our history, take down statues, I believe there has to be a real process, and it has to be a long process.
100%.
And it cannot be on the back of an event, maybe you would say a terrible event, but an event in the USA. The murder of George Floyd, that had nothing to do with the statue of Colston.
I think the papers, a couple of them have gone with where will it end? And I agree with that. Where does it end? And
scary precedent has been set.
It sets a very scary precedent. I think it opens up groups like Extinction Rebellion to maybe go and smash up a few buildings on camera and get away with it.
Well, they're already getting away with it, aren't they? We're just going to have to make sure we keep Emily Garver away from Karl Marx's grave, okay?
Yes. Would I get away with going into London and smashing something up because I don't like vaccine passports or...
Well, no, of course you wouldn't.
I know, why
Of course you wouldn't. But if you're part of the woke mob, it's okay.
Right, okay.
That's how...
I'm on the wrong side.
Yeah. Now, a creative singleton has devised an interesting way to find love and avoid an arranged marriage. Mohammed Malik spent hundreds of pounds on several giant billboards across Birmingham. This is amazing. The ads feature a 20-foot picture of Malik lying down, flashing a cheeky grin for the camera and joking, "Save me from an arranged marriage," with another directing potential suitors to his website, findmalikawife.com. Now, prospective suitors can watch a short video on his website to learn a little more on their potential future hubby.
Hi, I'm Malik. You might have seen my face on a billboard somewhere. I'm 29, living La Vida, London. I am an entrepreneur, I'm a foodie, and I'm religious. I am looking for someone who is working on her deen. I'm open to any ethnicity, but come from a loud Punjabi family, so the banter has to be 100. If you're interested, fill out the form or check out my details.
Well, apparently he's already had 10 replies. I think, after showing it on GB News, he may have a lot more interest. We're popular in Birmingham. Emily Carver, Adam Brooks, Daisy McAndrew, stand by. Are you interested, Emily? No, you're taken.
He seemed lovely.
He seems like a nice guy, doesn't he? Now, coming up, the crowning moment of the show as I coronate today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. And next, after so much Omicron hysteria, should there be more scrutiny of the vested interests of scientists? Rod Liddle thinks so. He's seconds away in Uncancelled. But first, very quick preview of what's coming up in tomorrow's show.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, does the left really want our awful new normal to last forever? The Spectator's Douglas Murray asks why Liberals are obsessed with bonkers COVID rules. US broadcasting superstar Megyn Kelly returns to give her expert take on the biggest international headlines. A social media giants like Twitter about to pay the price for letting cancel culture run amok. Former Trump advisor turned tech pioneer Jason Miller joins me to discuss his new free speech friendly platform. Plus, I'll break down the day's biggest stories with my superstar panel, Loose Women star and broadcaster Carol McGiffin, conservative commentator Dominique Samuels, and the author and journalist Amy Nicol. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
But it's time now for Uncancelled. This is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. And during yesterday's government press conference, Boris Johnson finally acknowledged what I and many other rational people have been saying for weeks, that the Omicron variant is a mild disease and there is no justification to impose more life-destroying restrictions. Why then were those doomsday sage advisors allowed to make unbridled predictions about how our hospitals would be crippled? And why are some of our institutions still blindly following these scientists without questioning if they have vested interests? Rod Liddle's here with me now, the Spectator's associate editor who's going to write on this week. Rod, are we being led by the science at all now?
No, it doesn't seem as if we are. We're being led by scientists, but not by science. One of the things which bothers me is that the scientists are never, ever given a going over journalists. They are never questioned. They are never challenged. And I listen to them sometimes, if I tune by mistake, on Radio 4, and sometimes on Times Radio. They will appear and they will say things which are patently untrue. And they are never, ever challenged. It's accepted that when they speak, they are speaking the whole ungilded, unvarnished truth, as if they were the same kind of thing, incidentally, which is afforded to people who work for charities and also supporters of the Palestinian organisations in Israel. And it's remarkable. I mean, let's just take one. My memory isn't failing me here, I promise you, Dan. I remember 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago even, very, very clearly listening to a succession of SAGE spokespeople and also other scientists and doctors from hospitals on Times Radio, on Radio 4, not being challenged when they said there is no evidence that Omicron is a mild variant. And I can remember the interviewers saying, well, we'd all rather hoped for this, but it was presumably a vain wish. And they would say there is no evidence. And there was loads of evidence at the time that Omicron was a much milder variant, and that evidence came from South Africa, apart from anywhere else. And they would say, oh, well, South Africa is demographic to us. But it was still very, very clear that this was a milder variant, and the evidence was there as well from the handful of cases, building up to the thousands of cases which had occurred in this country. A week or so later, they began to concede that perhaps Omicron was a little mild. So we're into kind of Christmas week now. But they would only say that with the rider that, but because of its transmissibility, it will make no difference whatsoever to the National Health Service, which is the thing which, of course, determines how we live our lives these days. Not whether it's bad for us, it's whether it's bad for this bureaucracy which predates upon us. That the transmissibility would make it just as bad as the Delta variant or the Alpha variant, because the cases which occur in hospital would go up and up. That hasn't happened. It hasn't remotely happened. There is not a scintilla of truth in that. And you know, Dan, I've not always been on the same side as you on the virus. I was in favour of the first lockdown, very much in favour of it. Truth be told, me old mate, I would rather we were all under lockdown permanently. I love lockdowns. But that's
it's great for you. Don't have to dress up, don't have to socialise.
I can sit here in my disparate t-shirt talking to people, and it doesn't matter. But we have to challenge these people. And we have to challenge them exactly the same way that we would challenge, for example, a conservative backbencher who says we shouldn't have any restrictions whatsoever. But they are never challenged like that. And yet they are telling us things which are palpably untrue and were demonstrably untrue 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, no, and that's why I'm so interested to talk to you about this, Rod, because you have been actually, throughout the course of this pandemic, relatively in step with what the government's done. You haven't been too annoyed about the scientists and the people who I would call the lockdown hysterics up until this point. So the fact that you think now they are purposefully trying to scare us rather than look at the data and properly explain what's going on, I think it's quite significant.
Well, I think it is, and it's occurred to me simply because of personal evidence that, you know, unless I'm going mad, I heard these things being said 2 or 3 weeks ago. But it seemed clear to me, as someone who isn't a scientist, it seemed clear to me from all the evidence we had that Omicron was much, much milder. And in fact, the truth today, I know lots of people who have colds and coughs, which are not Omicron, have tested negative, and they're in a far worse state than those who have Omicron and have tested positive. The effect upon the individual is nil, virtually nil in almost every case. And that's what worries me. And what worries me, again, is the credulity of the press, particularly The Guardian. If you read The Guardian, you would think that Omicron was still this massive danger to us all and we're all going to die. I mean, its reporting has been appalling. But it hasn't been much better on the radio and television stations simply because these guys have not been held to account. And we know from that rather wonderful leak, where Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, took to task someone who had done modelling on the Omicron variant and revealed from him that they always put the worst possible case scenario on everything.
I know. And the modelling was suggesting 3,000 to 6,000 deaths a day. But Rod Little, it's a fascinating column. Thank you for having the discussion with me, and we'll speak again next week. Time now, though, to reveal today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. My superstar panel back with me. Emily Carver, your nomination for greatest Brit.
Well, it's got to be Posey Parker, who has been very brave this week in many different media interviews, and she stood up against men who've told her that biology doesn't exist.
Yes, otherwise known as Callie J. Keane. So 2 different names for her there. Adam Brooks, your nomination.
It's Sir Andrew Pollard for highlighting this dystopian future we've got of jabs every 3 to 6 months.
And Daisy McAndrew, your nominee.
Mine is the Labour MP Stephen Timms, who, in an interview, I believe, with your very own Gloria De Piero, Dan, told Gloria about how he's been receiving letters from the woman who attempted to murder him, we all remember 11 years ago, asking if he would meet with her as a form of restorative justice, and he has said he would. He also said, which I thought was really interesting, that she was a radicalised Muslim, that he has now better contacts with Muslims in his constituency because so many had offered their support.
Fascinating interview, but I'm going to go with Adam, because I obviously spoke about Andrew Pollard earlier in the show. He's been so brave. He's today's greatest Britain, absolutely. Very quickly, Union Jackass nominations. Emily Carver, we just spoke about her.
Yes, it's going to be one of the Colston 4, Sage Willoughby, who said that they hadn't changed history, they'd rectified it.
Adam Brooks, your nominee.
Nadeem Zahawi for masking our kids in school with very flimsy evidence.
Yeah, we haven't seen it yet. Come on, Nadeem. And Daisy McAndrew, your nomination.
It's very difficult to do it quickly. She's called Stephanie Matto, and she was selling her farts online and making...
I've never heard of this woman.
Making £3,800 a week. But then she ate so many beans to create these farts that she ended up in hospital. She was having a heart attack. She's got to win the jackass, surely.
Daisy, I've never even heard of this moment. No, absolutely not. I'm going for Sage Willoughby. You haven't changed history, mate. All you have done is vandalise a statue. Fascinating day today. Brilliant superstar panel. Emily Carver, Adam Brooks, Daisy McAndrew, thank you so much. We'll see you again very soon. I'll be back again tomorrow from 9 o'clock, of course. Thank you for your company tonight. It's time for headliners now, though. Good night.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. It is getting cold out there. It's going to be frosty tonight and frosty in the morning. A few fog patches as well. Wet weather then spreads east tomorrow with some snow mixed in, mostly over the hills. That's courtesy of this area of low pressure, but it's not with us yet. A bump in the isobars, a ridge of high pressure, meaning clear skies, and those